The moment I opened the floodgates, I felt like I was waking the ghost of my father. Ridgewater Dam groaned as the water surged forward, wild and hungry. It crashed down the hill, swallowing lawns, porches, and picket fences. The 40 homes were new, but the land was old, and it remembered. I stood there, soaked and silent, as the water roared past me, pulling pieces of stolen wood and ceramic garden gnomes. Below, Karen Hollowell, the queen of HOA, was screaming, her silk robe clinging to her in the chaos. Her kingdom was drowning. And I had finally taken back what was mine. Before we continue, please drop a like and comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Australia, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to know. Don't just sit back, tell me where in the world you are. Now, let's dive into the story. She saw me. I stood tall at the edge of the dam, the lever still in my hand. Our eyes locked. Her mascara ran like black rivers down her cheeks. She was shouting something, probably threats or curses, but the sound of the flood drowned her voice. Reporters later said it looked biblical. And it did. That valley was never meant to hold those homes. Karen had taken what didn't belong to her, built over it, profited off it. And in one night, the land reminded her who it truly belonged to. The headlines called it a disaster. I called it justice. I wasn't always this man. I used to fix tractors and volunteer at the local fire station. Ridgewater Valley was quiet, just how I liked it. My name is Silas Maddox. 45. Grew up in a house my great-granddad built with his bare hands. My father, Boone Maddox, left me that land when he passed. He didn't leave me much else, just the land and a warning, keep your eyes open. Folks don't always steal with guns. Sometimes it's ink and a smile. I didn't know what he meant back then. But now, standing at the dam, soaked and shaking, I finally understood. It wasn't the first time someone tried to take the valley. After my father died, developers swarmed like flies. They offered me millions. Big promises, solar parks, golf resorts, even a winery. I said no. The land had history. Family buried here. Memories carved into trees and rocks. Then came Karen Hollowell, dressed in pastels and pearls, clipboard in hand. She moved into Rosewood Hills, the gated community next door, and started calling herself the HOA president. She never introduced herself properly. She just smiled and said, "You know, Silas, this valley could be worth so much more if you'd modernize." Karen had a talent. She smiled like she meant well, but every word out of her mouth cut like a razor. At first, she sent letters. Then surveyors. Then pink ribbons on my fence line. When I asked what she was doing, she said, "Just community planning." I told her the land wasn't for sale. Not then, not ever. Her eyes flickered with something dark. "You might regret that," she said. That night, I found her SUV parked just beyond the oaks. Next morning, survey tape snaked into my woods. I tore it down, but deep down, I knew it had already begun. Months passed, and I thought the fight was over. But one morning I woke to the sound of engines. I drove to the ridge and my heart stopped. Bulldozers. Foundation crews. 40 homes, already halfway built. Beige boxes stacked like bricks on what used to be my family's pasture. I stormed to City Hall. Slapped my deed on the counter. The clerk looked up and said, "According to our files, you sold that land last year." My jaw dropped. She handed me forged documents, a fake signature. The notary's name? Karen's cousin. My blood boiled. She hadn't just stolen land, she'd erased me. I hired the best lawyer I could afford, Waylon Burr. He was old school, wore bow ties and smelled like bourbon. We filed lawsuits, injunctions, and every legal roadblock we could throw. But Karen's team came back stronger. They had money, connections, and a willingness to fight dirty. They stalled the case. Drained my bank. Waylon finally leaned across his desk and said, "Son, you won't win this with paperwork. She's got the courts eating out of her hand. You need something bigger than a briefcase. You need thunder." I found that thunder in the most unlikely place. Diego Marquez, a contractor who used to work for Karen. He came to my door late one night, soaking wet, hands shaking. "They paid me to fake the boundary lines," he whispered. Showed me texts, receipts, even blueprints marked in red. I thought it was harmless, but they never paid me. Now she's threatening to sue me too. I recorded his story, backed up the files, and sent it all to the city. No reply. The mayor? Silent. Karen had more than power, she had protection. That's when I stopped looking at courts and started looking at the dam. My father built Ridgewater Dam with his own hands. He used to say, "This dam will outlive me. Might even save us one day." It had pressure valves, overflow tunnels, even a manual lever system. I restored every inch, installed cameras, cleaned the sluices, and I waited. The homes were built right in the old flood basin. It was a matter of time. So when the rain came, I tracked every drop, logged every pressure spike. I emailed warnings, posted notices. No one listened. They laughed. Karen called me a paranoid farmer. I smiled and told her, nature always collects her debts. On the fourth day of rain, the water reached its peak. I sent one final email, emergency release required. Ridgewater Dam approaching failure point. At 10:03 p.m., I stood on the concrete platform and pulled the lever. The gate opened with a howl. The water screamed. Down below, floodlights flickered. Then came the screams. Driveways became rivers. Lawns lifted. Cars floated. I saw Karen on her porch, screaming at the top of her lungs. Her voice cracked. But no one could stop it. The dam had spoken. And this time, I made sure the world listened. My daddy used to say the land had a heartbeat, and if you listened real close, you could hear it talk. Ridgewater Valley was never just dirt and trees, it was blood and legacy. My great-grandfather, Elias Maddox, cleared the first patch with nothing but a mule and grit. My father, Boone, built the dam to irrigate and protect it. When he passed, the land came to me like a torch. I remember his voice, gruff and low. Silas, protect what's yours. Don't let paper men or pretty smiles take it. Some thieves don't carry knives. They carry clipboards. I never wanted to be rich. I wanted to be right. Right with the land, the history, the quiet. Ridgewater was one of the last wild places in Sorrel County. When developers came, I listened politely, then told them no. They offered shiny numbers, 7 figures, then 8. But it wasn't about money. It was about peace. My peace came from watching deer cut through the fog or hearing coyotes howl at dusk. I thought standing firm made me a guardian. Turns out it made me a target. Especially when a woman named Karen set her sights on what wasn't hers. Karen Hollowell was the kind of woman who wore pearl earrings to mow her lawn. She didn't ask, she announced. Everything about her screamed control. After she got elected HOA president of Rosewood Hills, the entire neighborhood changed. Yards had to be mowed weekly. Flags had to be pre-approved. Even Christmas lights had curfews. People complained quietly, but Karen smiled like a preacher on Easter Sunday. She had this way of acting like everything was already hers, including the view of my land. Think of the potential, she once said, staring at my hills. I told her to look elsewhere. It started subtle. A fence post moved 3 inches. A letter in my mailbox warning of fire hazards on my side of the property. Then came the drone, a little buzzing eye that hovered over my barn. When I confronted her, she chuckled. Just making sure you're within code, she said. I told her my land didn't fall under her rulebook. Her lips curled into a smile, but her eyes flashed cold. Not yet, she whispered. That was the moment I realized she wasn't just annoying. She was planning something. And worse, she thought she'd already won. Weeks later, pink surveyor flags appeared near the old birch grove. I pulled them out and tossed them in a trash barrel. The next morning, they were back, twice as many. That night, I saw a man in a reflective vest walking the property line with a flashlight. I shouted, but he ran. I filed a complaint. The sheriff shrugged and said it was probably a mix-up. But I knew. Karen was testing boundaries, literally. She wanted to see how far she could push before I snapped. What she didn't know was I'd learned patience from the land. But even the land has limits. Then came the planning commission meetings. Karen showed up in heels and a binder labeled Ridgewater Renewal Project. She claimed I had agreed to donate a portion of my land for sustainable housing. I stood up in that room and said I never signed a thing. They smiled at me like I was a confused old man. That night, I got a letter from the city informing me of zoning changes. The wording was slick, talk of reallocation and shared infrastructure. But what it meant was simple: they were taking my land. On paper. With lies and signatures I never wrote. I tried to fight it the proper way. Hired a surveyor. Filed objections. Sent certified letters. But every time I knocked on a door, it swung back on me. They said the paperwork was too far along. Maybe consider selling, one clerk suggested, avoiding eye contact. I felt like I was shouting into a canyon. I could feel Ridgewater slipping away, inch by inch. And all the while, Karen strutted around town with that smug smile, shaking hands and posing for newspaper articles about community growth. It was theft, but done with manicures and legal terms. And nobody stopped her. The real punch to the gut came when I drove by and saw wooden frames being hammered into the soil. No ceremony, no notice. Just noise and dust. 40 homes rising like weeds. I parked on the hill and stared, heart pounding like a war drum. It felt like a funeral, except they weren't burying someone. They were burying me. That night, I walked every foot of the dam. Ran my hands along the stone like it was a spine. I remembered what Boone said: when people won't listen to words, nature finds her voice. I felt something crack inside me. I thought about my mama, who planted sunflowers by the fence every spring. About my younger brother, who drowned in the creek back in '83. About the time I carved my initials into the oak tree with a pocket knife. That land held stories. It held pain and joy and blood. And now it held 40 boxes full of strangers who didn't know its name. I stood there on the ridge and promised the soil, I will not let this stand. Not for money. Not for pride. But for memory. For justice. For the heartbeat beneath my boots. I didn't know how yet, but I knew I was done playing by their rules. If the courts were bought and the city was deaf, I'd find another way. I walked back to the dam, the moon slicing across the water like a blade. I stared at the lever my father had built, the one no one else knew how to use. And for the first time in weeks, I felt calm. The land would speak. And when it did, it wouldn't whisper. The first time I saw the bulldozers tear through Ridgewater, I felt like a man watching his own funeral. They didn't even pause. Trees that had stood longer than I'd been alive cracked and fell like matchsticks. Dust plumed into the sky. Workers moved fast, too fast. I climbed the hill, heart pounding, and found my "No trespassing" signs crumpled in the mud. A man in an orange vest waved like I was the intruder. "You Silas," he shouted over the roar. "We got permits." I stared at him and realized he truly believed that gave him the right to destroy. I marched straight to City Hall, clutching every paper I owned, my deed, my father's old survey map, even Boone's handwritten will. The clerk, a young guy named Bryce, looked like he'd never seen real dirt under fingernails. He flipped through my file and frowned. "This says you sold the west section 2 years ago," he said. My stomach dropped. He showed me a scanned signature. My name but not my hand. "Who notarized this?" I asked. "A Hollowell," he replied. "Karen's cousin." My jaw clenched. I'd been robbed with a pen. And they were building on my family's grave. I went home, shut the blinds, and stared at my father's photo. He had this way of looking through a camera like he was warning the future. I could hear his voice again. "You trust people too much, Silas. The ones with money always think they can buy the wind." That night, I couldn't sleep. I printed every document I had and laid them across the kitchen table like a crime board. The puzzle pieces were there: the forged sale, the city's silence, the HOA's pressure, the speed of construction. It was a con, slick, legal-looking, but still a theft. The next morning, I hired a lawyer named Reese Murdoch. He had steel-gray hair and eyes that never blinked too long. "You've got a paper trail problem," he said, scanning the forgeries. "They filed just enough to make it muddy. This wasn't sloppy, it was planned." He explained how land disputes like this got buried in appeals, delays, and courtroom games. "We can fight it," he said, But it'll cost more than you want to spend, and they're hoping you burn out before a judge ever sees it. He paused. You want to win? You better be meaner than them. So I got mean. I stopped being polite. I stopped hoping. I started digging. I found out Karen had connections to the city's zoning board. Her college roommate was now a district planner. Her HOA treasurer was married to the mayor's assistant. The whole thing smelled like rot. I filed a complaint with the state land registry, but they bounced it back to the county. I went to the sheriff, but he said it was a civil matter. They all smiled politely while letting the saws keep cutting. It wasn't just theft, it was erasure. They wanted Ridgewater to vanish quietly. A week later, I drove past the construction site and saw something that stopped me cold. A billboard with a happy family and the words, "Welcome to Karen's Crossing." Karen's. She didn't just steal the land, she branded it. Claimed it like a gold rush prospector. I parked and stared at that sign until my hands shook. 40 homes. 40 families moving in. 40 reminders that the world didn't care what you earned or loved or fought for. All it took was the right name on the wrong form. That night, I didn't cry. I planned. Quietly. Carefully. Like water behind a dam. I started logging everything. Every truck, every contractor, every shift. I recorded rainfall, runoff, drainage flaws. I pulled old floodplain reports and took drone footage of the lowlands. What they built was unstable. The foundation rested on silt and sand. A real planner would have known it was a basin, a natural flood sink. But Karen didn't care. She thought Ridgewater would bend to her will like the HOA board. But Ridgewater wasn't like them. Ridgewater had memory. And bones. I wasn't looking for loopholes anymore. I was looking for leverage. Not in the courts. In the creek. Then Diego knocked on my door. He was nervous, looking over his shoulder like he was being watched. I used to pour concrete for Hollowell projects, he said. They told us to ignore the old boundaries. Said the owner was on board, but just hard to reach. I let him talk. He showed me photos, emails, GPS logs. One email read, "Push foundation through Western Tract. Owner's doc on file, signed off." Attached was my forged signature. I copied everything. Backed it up. I had truth now. But truth only works if someone's willing to listen. And no one in this town was. I submitted the evidence to the planning board. I sent it to the local paper, the sheriff, even the governor's office. Nothing. No reply. Karen had built a wall of silence so thick, even justice couldn't get in. That's when I understood. They wouldn't act until the damage was done. Until the water came. I started inspecting the dam every day, logging water pressure. I cleaned the release valves. I checked the sluices. The land was ready. All I had to do was wait for the skies to open. And when they did, Ridgewater would roar. And Karen would hear it. The first storm rolled in like a whisper. Gray clouds settled low over the ridge, and the wind tugged at my jacket like it knew what was coming. I stood at the edge of Ridgewater Dam, watching the surface ripple under soft raindrops. The water hadn't risen yet, but the earth was already thirsty. I lit a cigarette with shaking hands, not from fear, but from anticipation. The dam was strong, older than me but well kept. It would hold just like I had. For years, I'd swallowed injustice like dry sand. But the land? The land was about to answer. By the second day, the rains were steady. Not a storm, not yet, but the kind of rain that seeps, that sinks deep and waits. I checked the dam's gauges twice a day. The runoff was rising slowly. A quiet power built beneath the surface, and with it, my resolve. I sent another packet of evidence to the city, marked urgent. It included Diego's confession, maps, and a weather forecast. Still no response. I called the news station. The receptionist said someone would look into it. Karen's silence told me everything. She thought she had outlasted me. But she had miscalculated. Karen wasn't quiet, though, not in her world. She was throwing open houses, selling dream homes to newcomers. Every Sunday, music played from her model house while she stood on the porch in expensive raincoats, smiling at young couples. I drove by once, slow and deliberate. She waved. I didn't. She thought I was beaten. Thought I'd grown used to the taste of dirt. But what she didn't know was that every rainfall was sharpening the knife. The basin beneath her precious homes had been waiting for years to reclaim what they paved over. And now, the sky was finally listening. By the fourth day, the storms began in earnest. Thunder rolled over the valley like a warning drum. My boots sunk into the muddy path as I walked the perimeter. The gauges rose past the halfway point. Still within safety limits, but climbing. I checked every overflow tunnel. Cleared debris from the sluices. I worked by lantern light, soaked to the bone. I wasn't reckless. I wasn't unstable. I was prepared. Boone had built Ridgewater Dam with a mechanic's mind and a prophet's heart. He knew the land had cycles. He knew some floods weren't accidents, they were corrections. That night, I received a text from Diego. Heard Karen's moving up her closings. Pushing for weekend contracts. I smiled. She wanted to secure every sale before anything looked off. Before water lines showed on basement walls or backyard swings started to float. I walked to the edge of the dam and stared down at the flickering lights of Karen's crossing. 40 homes. 40 lies. 40 echoes of my erased name. And in the center of it all, Karen's flagstone patio glistened with rain. I whispered, "I warned you," to the dark, and the dam hummed beneath my boots like it agreed. By morning, a landslide on the East Ridge sent more runoff into the reservoir. I radioed the county, no answer. I sent photos to local meteorologists. Some replied, concerned. But no orders came. I printed every message, every timestamp, and sealed them in a waterproof box, along with Boone's blueprints and my journal. Not because I expected to die, but because I knew history had a habit of being rewritten. And I wasn't going to let Karen pen the last chapter. If the world wouldn't protect Ridgewater, then Ridgewater would protect itself. I wasn't releasing water yet, but the clock had started. Karen must have noticed the tension, because that afternoon she called me, for the first time in over a year. "Silas," she said sweetly, "we're concerned about drainage. Thought maybe you could offer some insight." I said nothing. "Look," she continued, her tone sharpening, "I'm sure we can come to some arrangement. It doesn't have to be messy." I laughed once, sharp and dry. "Karen," I said, "it's already messy. You just don't see the mud yet." I hung up. Her silence afterward was louder than the rain. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the lever, listening to the reservoir breathe. On the seventh day, it became a flood watch. The National Weather Service issued alerts. The local sheriff finally called, said he wanted to come by and take a look. I told him to bring a camera. Reporters started poking around, but Karen put on her brightest smile and walked them through the model home. "Totally safe," she said. "All city approved." She was so used to winning with charm that she didn't realize charm couldn't waterproof a foundation. I watched the news clip from my kitchen, lightning flashing outside the window. Karen, laughing. Karen, waving. Karen, thumped. I reinforced the gate controls and set up 2 battery backups. If the system failed, I'd still have the manual lever. I wasn't planning sabotage. I was preparing for inevitability. The homes were built on a lie, on land that never asked to be reshaped. All I did was preserve the dam and document the truth. I sent one final letter, registered, signed receipt, to the county. "Ridgewater Dam is nearing critical level. Unauthorized construction below floodplain endangers life and property. If no action is taken, release protocol will be initiated to preserve dam integrity." I signed it, Silas Maddox, steward of Ridgewater. That night, I stood at the dam's edge again. Water lapped at the brim. The wind smelled of wet leaves and steel. The sky cracked open with a growl. The land had spoken. The sky had answered. All that remained was my hand. I looked down at Karen's crossing, those tidy boxes with their porch lights glowing warm. I remembered Boone's words, "Some things ain't meant to stay stolen." I ran my hand along the rusted lever, then walked back to the cabin. I didn't pull it yet, but the dam was ready. And when the moment came, it would not whisper. It would roar. It was just past midnight when I woke to the sound of hail tapping against the tin roof like urgent fingers. I got up, pulled on my boots, and grabbed the flashlight. The power had flickered twice already that night. When I stepped outside, The air felt heavy, like it carried secrets. I made my way down the trail to Ridgewater Dam, where the reservoir churned and spat mist into the dark. The gauges blinked red. She was full. Nearly tipping. I pressed my palm to the cold lever. It didn't feel like power. It felt like responsibility. And the moment was near. In the distance, headlights bounced along the gravel road. I ducked behind the control shed. A county truck pulled up. Sheriff Doyle stepped out, umbrella in hand. He looked up at the dam, then at me. "You planning to release it, Silas?" I didn't answer. He sighed. "I read your file. The letters. The maps. It's all a mess. But if you flood those homes," I cut him off. "They flooded me first. With lies." He didn't argue. Just said, "You'd better have proof this was necessary." I nodded. "Come back with a warrant or a witness. You've got till sunrise." He left without another word. I went inside the shed and double-checked every log. Rainfall, 7.4 inches in 48 hours. Soil saturation, 96%. Spillway status, at critical. I flipped through my father's blueprints one last time. Boone built this dam to last, but even he knew water doesn't ask for permission when it's had enough. It was built with a lever for a reason. Not to destroy. To defend. I scribbled my initials next to the final timestamp. Then I walked back to the edge, flashlight beam cutting through the dark. Below me, Karen's crossing glowed like a lie wrapped in fairy lights. Around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. A blocked number. I answered. "Silas," said a voice I knew too well. "Karen, you're making a mistake. Don't ruin everything because you're bitter." I didn't reply. She continued, "Those homes are filled with families now. Children." Her voice cracked, fake but practiced. "You don't want blood on your hands." I breathed in slow. "You put them there, Karen. I warned you. I told everyone. This isn't revenge. This is reality." She scoffed. "You'll go to jail for this." I smiled. "Only if the water doesn't speak louder than you." Then I hung up. By 4:15 a.m., the rain intensified. The wind was a chorus of groans and rattles. I saw one of the slope sensors tip into the red. A landslide warning blinked on the screen. This was it. The final line. I opened the steel lockbox and pulled out the sealed envelope I'd prepared weeks ago. Drone footage, Diego's statement, my dam records, and a flash drive labeled truth. If they wanted to prosecute me, they'd have to sift through all that first. I placed it on the bench inside the shed. Labeled it with Karen's name. Just in case. At 5:02 a.m., the first retaining wall shifted. A chunk of mud sloughed off the east bank, sliding down toward the culvert. I stood and grabbed the lever. I pulled once, gently, testing it. The gears creaked but held. I looked down again. A dog barked from one of the backyards. A porch light flickered. Somewhere down there, Karen was probably still in silk pajamas, sipping imported tea, thinking she'd tamed this land. But she hadn't. And she never would. Ridgewater wasn't for sale. It never had been. I braced both hands on the lever, shut my eyes, and listened to the storm. Then came the voice I didn't expect. "Silas." It was Sheriff Doyle, shouting from the other side of the dam. "Wait." He had a man with him, someone from the planning department. They waved papers in the air, slipping on the slick path. I waited. Doyle reached me out of breath. "We verified the documents," he said. "The signatures were forged. The land is still yours. We'll issue a halt. Tear it all down." My hands dropped to my sides. I stared at him. "And if I hadn't waited?" I asked. He didn't answer. The water behind me growled, impatient. I stepped back. "You have 1 week," I told him. 1 week to bulldoze every piece of that theft. The planner nodded. "We'll make it right." I looked down at Karen's crossing again. Still whole. For now. The storm passed by noon. I watched the water settle. I never pulled the lever that night, but the message was sent. Loud and clear. Ridgewater would not be stolen. Not in silence. Not without cost. Doyle stayed behind to take statements. I handed him the envelope. "Deliver this to the mayor yourself," I said. "And tell Karen, The next flood won't be a warning. The dam held. But only barely. Days later, work crews began ripping up driveways and deconstructing homes. Some families left in tears. Some stayed to protest. But the city had no choice. Karen vanished from the HOA board. Her name stripped from every file and street sign. The papers called it the Ridgewater Miracle. But I knew better. It wasn't a miracle. It was restraint. A flood held back by a man who had every reason to unleash it. I didn't win with violence. I won with truth, patience, and the promise of nature. Because some levers don't just release water. They release justice. Karen Hollowell didn't go quietly. The very next morning, she marched down Main Street in a tailored trench coat and designer rain boots, dragging 2 reporters and a real estate lawyer behind her like ducklings. "It's all a mistake," she told the cameras. "The land was legally acquired. This is slander." But she was too late. Sheriff Doyle's team had already delivered the documents to the city. The planning department issued an emergency order to halt development. Bulldozers idled. Workers packed up. And slowly, the people of Karen's Crossing started to realize they weren't living in dream homes. They were trespassing. Karen called an emergency HOA meeting at the Rosewood Clubhouse. Only half the members showed up. Her voice echoed in the hollow hall as she blamed administrative confusion and rogue staffers. But the whispers had started. Parents who'd bought homes on forged deeds were furious. One father slammed a folder on the table. "You said it was certified. My wife gave birth in that house." Karen snapped, "I'm fixing it." But no one believed her anymore. By the end of the meeting, someone had removed her name from the board plaque. The HOA vice president, the same woman Karen once fired for a lawn flamingo, called for a vote. Back at Ridgewater, I kept quiet. I didn't celebrate. I worked. Every day, I monitored the dam, logged the water pressure, and watched as the construction crews dismantled the illegal homes, one frame at a time. It wasn't revenge, it was restoration. Ridgewater was breathing again. Deer returned to the creek. Birds circled above without the scream of saws to scare them off. I fixed the north culvert, patched the overflow tunnel, and repainted the shed door. It felt like cleaning up after a crime scene. Except this time, the law wasn't dragging me away. It was watching my back. Then came the lawsuits. Karen was slapped with civil complaints from over 20 buyers. Fraud, misrepresentation, emotional distress. Her lawyer, the same one who once winked at me in court, now avoided eye contact. The city issued fines. The county threatened to revoke her license. Karen tried to spin the story online, but no one bought it. A viral video surfaced of her yelling at a construction crew in the rain. Her hair was soaked. Her makeup ran. And the caption read, "This HOA queen just got dethroned by a dam farmer." I didn't post it, but I watched it. Twice. One afternoon, Diego returned. He brought his cousin this time, a stonemason named Rafe who'd helped lay the Ridgewater walls decades ago. "Your father paid us in cash and supper," Rafe said, touching the stone like it was holy. "He built it to last longer than liars." We shared a drink on the ridge and watched as the last home was taken down. Karen's model home. They pulled off the roof in chunks, stripped the siding, crushed the porch with a backhoe. It wasn't just demolition, it was deliverance. The land sighed beneath it. Ridgewater was no longer gagged by greed. I thought that would be the end of it. But Karen had one last play. She filed a countersuit against me. Claimed I'd threatened her, intimidated workers, sabotaged development. Sheriff Doyle laughed when he read it. "You saved the town, Silas," he said. "Let her scream. Ain't nobody listening anymore." Even the judge tossed the suit within a week. But I showed up anyway just to see her face. She wore all black. Her lawyer mumbled excuses. And when the gavel dropped, I leaned in and whispered, "Now the land is quiet again." She didn't reply. Just looked down at her shoes. The city offered me a settlement, $800,000 and an official apology. I took the apology, declined the check, said I'd accept it as a donation to rebuild the town's watershed education program. I didn't want their money. I wanted their memory. Let them remember the man they ignored, the dam they forgot, and the truth that nearly drowned beneath the lies. Mayor Aldridge shook my hand. "We won't forget, Silas," he said. "You held firm." I replied, "No, sir. The land held firm. I just listened to it." And for the first time in years, I felt like Ridgewater had finally spoken back. Weeks later, the city declared Ridgewater Valley a protected historical watershed. No development, no zoning tricks, just forest, creek, and wind. They put up a new sign at the base of the trail, Boone and Silas Maddox Preservation Grounds. I carved my father's name into a new bench, facing the dam. Every evening, I sit there with my boots in the grass and a thermos of black coffee, watching the sunset slip across the water. Ridgewater doesn't roar anymore. It hums. A deep, calm song that only those who stayed long enough can hear. I never needed revenge. I just needed silence. Karen moved out of Sorrel County 2 months later. Sold her mansion for half its value. Rumor has it she tried to start over in Arizona, joined another HOA, and was voted out in 2 weeks. Some folks just don't learn. I never spoke to her again. Never needed to. The dam still stands. The water still waits. And the valley still remembers. Because some battles aren't fought with fists. They're fought with roots. With memory. With patience. And if the world forgets, Ridgewater will remind them. Quietly. Firmly. With one hand on the lever, and one ear to the ground. The news trucks showed up on a Tuesday, just as the last roof came down. A local station aired a segment titled, "The Farmer Who Saved Ridgewater." Within hours, it was trending online. Cameras followed me as I trimmed hedges and fed my chickens. I didn't ask for attention, but it found me. Reporters called me mysterious, stoic, and one even said ruggedly handsome. Boone would have laughed at that. I didn't care about fame. I cared about the message. Let them talk. Let them learn. Let them remember what happens when you ignore a land's warning signs, and the man standing guard over it. Karen, of course, was nowhere to be found. Her house went dark. 4 sale signs popped up around Rosewood Hills. The HOA board quietly dissolved after a vote of no confidence. Neighbors whispered about how she'd manipulated everyone. The same people who once praised her lawn parties now called her a fraud. One woman stopped me outside the diner. "We didn't know," she said. "We thought she was helping the community." I nodded politely, but I didn't lie. "You didn't look hard enough." Her cheeks flushed pink. That was the thing about people like Karen. They don't act alone. They need applause. I was invited to speak at a town council meeting. I wore my cleanest flannel, boots scrubbed just enough to keep from tracking mud. The mayor opened by apologizing publicly. "You were right, Silas," he said. "You tried every channel." I stepped up to the podium and let the silence stretch before I spoke. "I wasn't trying to win," I said. "I was trying to be heard. When you silence people long enough, they either break or they flood." There were no cheers, just a heavy quiet. The kind that comes when truth hangs in the air and no one can escape it. Summer came fast, and with it, dry days and heat waves. Ridgewater Dam held steady. I checked it daily, even though the rain had stopped. Some habits don't go away. I started rebuilding parts of the valley myself, clearing brush, restoring walking trails. Locals came by to help. Teenagers from the high school, retirees with garden gloves. One man handed me a folded letter. "From my dad," he said. "He says thanks for keeping his father's land safe." I unfolded the paper that night, and Boone's name was in it. Turns out, Ridgewater held more stories than even I'd known. Generations. Echoes. Diego got a job with the county maintenance crew. Rafe started offering free dam inspections around the county. "Can't have more Karens getting bright ideas," he joked. I kept in touch with both. We met for beer every Friday night at Keller's Taproom, where they named a drink after me, the Dam Slam. Whiskey, ginger, and just enough bitterness to make your throat tighten. I didn't laugh much, but I smiled more. The rage that once kept me up at night had burned off like morning fog. What was left was clarity, and a valley that had finally gone quiet. One day, I got a package in the mail, no return address. Inside was a flash drive and a handwritten note. "You were never crazy." She did worse in other places. The drive contained audio from another development Karen had worked on, recordings of her pushing inspectors, laughing about forged maps, mocking buyers. I sent it to the Attorney General's office. 2 weeks later, I heard she'd been subpoenaed. Fraud across multiple counties. She wouldn't just lose power. She'd face real consequences. I didn't need to watch it happen. I just stood on the ridge that night, watching the moon cast silver across the water. I began writing. Not a memoir. Just memories. About Boone. About Mama's garden. About the way Ridgewater smelled in October when the leaves went copper. I didn't want to forget it again. I'd spent so long defending the valley, I'd almost forgotten to love it. The land wasn't a battlefield anymore. It was a home. I printed pages and pinned them in the shed beside the dam controls. Each one a piece of the truth. Not for the world. For me. For whoever came after. Because someday, someone else might stand where I stood. And they'd need to know why it mattered. The paper published an op-ed titled, "Let the Land Speak." I didn't write it, but it quoted me. I cut it out and pinned it beside the blueprints Boone had drawn decades ago. His handwriting, mine, now side by side. Generations apart but rooted in the same soil. I looked out over the valley and finally let myself exhale. There were no more permits, no more threats, no more drone buzzes or HOA fines. Just wind and water and sun. And the promise that the land would be left alone. That maybe, this time, people had learned. Karen's story didn't end with a bang. It ended in silence. No one returned her calls. No one visited. She faded from the town's memory like smoke. But Ridgewater? It stayed. Stronger than ever. And in its silence, it carried the story of a man who refused to move. A dam that didn't break. And a truth that rose like floodwater until it couldn't be ignored. Sometimes, justice doesn't come in sirens. It comes in stillness. The kind that follows after the storm, when everything that matters is still standing. I thought once the homes came down, the ache in my chest would too, but it didn't. Not right away. Ridgewater was healing, sure. But healing doesn't erase scars. I walked the valley every morning, boots sinking into the soft earth where foundations used to be. The land remembered. I could feel it hum under my feet, like it was finally breathing again. Trees bent toward the light. Grass pushed through cracked concrete. Deer returned, tentative but unafraid. I'd spent years fighting for this silence, but now that it was here, it felt almost too loud. Like grief with no name. The city offered to honor me with a plaque. I declined. They wanted to turn Ridgewater into a park, benches, picnic tables, maybe a kiosk telling my story. I said no. This wasn't a fairy tale. This wasn't for tourists. Let the land tell its own story, I said. Let it grow over the shame. Instead, I planted sunflowers where Karen's model home once stood. The same kind Mama used to plant along the old fence line. Every morning they turned toward the sun, and every night they bowed toward the dam. A reminder that roots run deeper than roads. The lawsuits dragged on. Karen's name was now attached to 7 active civil cases and 2 criminal investigations. Every time I heard her name on the radio or saw it in the paper, I turned the page. I wasn't interested in her punishment. I wasn't even interested in her apology. I just wanted her gone. Forgotten. Not like Ridgewater, not like the land. That's the difference. Karen built with shortcuts. I built with memory. She saw property lines. I saw inheritance. She spoke in threats. I listened to soil. In the end, her concrete crumbled. Still stood, right where Boone poured it. One evening, Sheriff Doyle came by. Brought pie. Said his wife made it. We sat on the dam and shared a slice with plastic forks. You ever think about leaving? He asked. I looked at the water. No, I said. You. He laughed. I did once. Before all this. But folks like you make it worth staying. We didn't talk about Karen. We didn't talk about court. We talked about fish populations, wind patterns, and the stars. It was the kind of conversation men have when the fight's over and they're trying to remember who they were before the war began. A few weeks later, a teacher from the local middle school called. Asked if she could bring her students out to see the dam. We're doing a unit on resilience, she said. I said yes, with one condition, They bring notebooks, not phones. 20 kids came, wide-eyed and curious. I told them about Boone, about the flood that never was, and about how standing still doesn't mean standing down. One girl raised her hand and asked, "Do you forgive her?" I paused. "I forgive the land," I said. "It forgave me. That's enough." She wrote something down, quiet and slow. The next day, a boy from that group came back with his grandfather, an old man in a straw hat who remembered Boone. "Your father gave me work in '77, he said. Paid me cash and pie." We laughed. I showed him the repairs I'd made, the reinforced spillways, the backup valves. He touched the stone and whispered, "Still solid." Before he left, he handed me a photo, Boone shaking hands with a younger version of himself beside the newly finished dam. I framed it and placed it inside the shed, across from the lever. Another memory rooted in Ridgewater's bones. That fall, the dam didn't flood. The rains came as they always did, but the system held firm. I took the quiet as a gift. Nights grew longer. Leaves turned orange and gold, blanketing the hill like a quilt. I started writing again, not reports, not journals. Letters. To my father. To the land. To the man I almost became if I hadn't waited. "You were right, Boone," I wrote. "They came for the land, but they didn't understand it. You can't own what you don't respect. You can't steal what never needed to be sold. The land remembers. And now, so do they." Karen's Crossing became a ghost story parents told their kids. Don't lie on paper, or you'll end up like Karen. Someone even carved a wooden sign at the trailhead, "This way to truth." I didn't touch it. Didn't add to it. Let the town say what they wanted. I had my own peace now. I'd earned it. In the evenings, I'd sit on the porch with a mug of chicory coffee, watching the sun dip behind the hills. The same hills Karen once tried to bulldoze. She built 40 homes on a lie. And the land erased every one, without mercy. I didn't need the dam to roar. I didn't need the flood to punish. I just needed them to see. And now they had. The records were corrected. The land restored. My name cleared. But more importantly, Ridgewater was no longer just a map in a file drawer. It was a warning. A reminder. A victory. Not loud. Not explosive. But lasting. Permanent. Boone would have called it justice with muddy boots. I called it peace. And every time the wind kissed the sunflowers, I felt it in my bones. Ridgewater was whole again. And so was I. The Ridgewater I knew returned in pieces. One week it was the sound of frogs by the creek again. The next, it was the scent of pine after a rain without the stink of concrete dust. I stopped waking up in a panic. Stopped checking the dam cameras every hour. Ridgewater wasn't just healing, it was reclaiming itself. There were still scars in the earth where homes had once stood. But the land was stubborn, like Boone used to say. Given time and silence, it grows back stronger. Like me. I was starting to breathe again, one lungful of peace at a time. One morning, I found a note tacked to the dam shed door. Written in careful, childlike handwriting. "Thank you for saving the trees. I like your sunflowers." No name. No return address. Just gratitude. I folded it gently and placed it beside Boone's blueprint. That one note meant more than every news headline. Because that's what Ridgewater was always about, what you leave behind for the ones who'll come next. Karen tried to build something fast and loud. But the valley only respects the quiet things, the slow ones. Roots, water, stone, and people who listen. Reporters kept trying to visit. I stopped answering. Let the story drift into legend. That's how Ridgewater prefers it. A college student came by asking to write her thesis on environmental justice and land sovereignty. I let her hike the trails but told her, no interviews. Just observation. She respected that. Left me a thank you basket with homemade preserves. I don't remember her name, but I remember the taste of her apple butter. That's how I want Ridgewater to be remembered, not in court transcripts or newspaper ink, but in memory, in simple offerings, in quiet respect. One afternoon, I stood on the ridge where Karen's Crossing used to be. The foundations were gone. In their place, wildflowers had started to bloom. Orange paintbrush, Queen Anne's lace, goldenrod. It was like the land had painted over the damage with its own palette. I closed my eyes and listened. No trucks. No saws. Just birdsong. I whispered to Boone, "We did it." The wind kicked up, rustling the brush. It felt like an answer. Not words. Just presence. Some victories don't need applause. They just need space to echo. Diego and Rafe visited again. They brought coffee and folding chairs, and we sat under the old oak tree overlooking the reservoir. "Feels like it never happened," Diego said. "But it did," I reminded him. "The land remembers. And so do we." We toasted our mugs. Rafe added, "They'll think twice before crossing another ridge with dirty hands." We laughed, deep belly laughs that felt like a release. Ridgewater didn't just survive corruption. It repelled it. That matters more than any settlement or newspaper story. Because now, others are watching. And remembering. I started planting again. Not crops, just things that belong. Bluebells. Clover. Saplings. I lined the path to the dam with river stones and set a bird bath near the lower stream. I didn't need a garden. I just needed to give the land a chance to thank me back. Every sprout felt like an apology for what had happened. And every new bloom was a promise that it wouldn't happen again, not here. Not while I'm alive. And hopefully not after I'm gone. I'm not Ridgewater's owner. I'm its memory keeper. Its sentinel. And I take that job more seriously than ever. Sheriff Doyle stopped by with a young deputy who'd never seen the dam before. "This is where the flood almost happened," he said. The deputy looked impressed. "But it didn't." Doyle winked at me. "Because someone did the right thing the hard way." I appreciated that. Not many people understand what it takes to stand alone against something everyone else calls progress. Progress is only good if it respects what came before. Ridgewater taught me that. Boone taught me that. And now, maybe I've taught it to a few others too. In October, the town invited me to speak at a school assembly. I said no at first. But the principal wrote me a letter by hand. Said it would mean something. I stood on that stage in front of 100 kids and told them the truth. Not the hero version, not the TV version. I told them that doing what's right sometimes means losing sleep, losing friends, even losing money. But that the land will remember who stood with it. And one day, when they're faced with their own Ridgewater, they'll know what to do. They clapped. I cried. I built a small bench overlooking the spillway. Carved a quote into the backrest, "Let the land speak. It knows better than we do." I didn't add my name. Didn't need to. Anyone who walks that path will feel the story, whether they know it or not. I leave sunflower seeds on the seat sometimes. The birds know the bench now. The water hums like a song Boone used to whistle. And for the first time in years, I feel like Ridgewater isn't just safe, it's whole. No signs. No gates. Just nature and memory, braided together like creek moss. Karen's name hasn't been said aloud in months. People avoid it like a bad omen. The road that led to her model home was renamed. It's now called Hollow Bend Trail, half joke, half warning. Let it stand. Let it remind anyone who thinks they can twist a place into profit. Ridgewater bent, but it never broke. And as long as I'm here, it never will. Because I've learned what it means to wait, to stand, to protect. Not out of anger, out of love. And if the time ever comes again, I still know where the lever is. Spring returned to Ridgewater like an old friend. The wildflowers were back in bloom, blanketing the hills in purple and gold. Creek water trickled over smooth stones, free and clear. No more cement dust. No more hammering. Just the honest sound of land healing. I walked the trail down from the dam, boots coated in mud, thermos in hand. The sun warmed my shoulders, and for the first time in years, my jaw wasn't tight. Ridgewater had been defended. Not by lawyers or by fences, but by time, patience, and one man who remembered what mattered. Boone would have called it sacred ground. The city erected a wooden marker where Karen's Crossing once stood. Just a plank with 3 words carved deep, "Let Ridgewater speak." No plaque. No credits. No names. That's how I wanted it. Let people hike the ridge and wonder what the story was. Let the wind whisper it. Karen's name had become a cautionary tale in town, like a ghost story whispered at cookouts. No one saw her after the last court date. Her mansion sat empty, her social accounts wiped clean. Her empire had crumbled, not in an explosion, but in the slow erosion of trust. I took down the no trespassing signs. Didn't need them anymore. The ones who mattered understood. The rest weren't coming. Ridgewater had become a place of quiet respect. Bird watchers showed up early mornings. A veteran hiked the valley daily, said the silence helped more than therapy. A couple got engaged by the spillway. I didn't ask names. I just nodded when they waved. The land wasn't mine to hoard. It never had been. I was just the keeper. The one who listened when no one else would. The one who stayed when others tried to pave it over. Sheriff Doyle stopped by on the anniversary of the flood that never happened. He brought pie again, peach this time, and we sat in silence for a while. "They're naming a trail after you," he said eventually. I shook my head. "Name it after the dam," I said. "That's the only thing that never cracked." He grinned, then got serious. "You ever worry someone else'll try again?" I looked at the dam. "Maybe. But next time, they won't find me unprepared." Because now the valley had history on its side. Now the records were clean, the cameras installed, the people awakened. Ridgewater had a voice. It kept the lever, kept the shed, kept the journals, the blueprints, and Boone's tools. But I never touched the floodgate again. Didn't need to. Its power wasn't in its use, it was in the knowledge that I could. And everyone else now knew it too. That's what stopped them. Not water, not threat, but truth, cold and still like the reservoir at dawn. Sometimes the only way to protect something is to show you're willing to lose everything for it. That's the story Ridgewater tells now. One of grit, of memory, of standing so still, the world finally takes notice. In town, kids started using the phrase, pulling a Ridgewater, to mean standing your ground. A few even carved it into a bench outside the high school. I never asked them to. Never said a word. But it meant something. The story had grown bigger than me. And maybe that's what Boone always meant when he said, build something that outlives your name. Not a monument. Not a memoir. Just a place where people remember to do right. Ridgewater had become that place. And me? I was just the man who opened the gate without opening the flood. One evening, I got a letter from the girl who once asked if I forgave Karen. She was in college now. Said she was writing about environmental guardianship. Enclosed was a photo of my sunflower field, laminated and captioned, "Because one man listened." I placed it beside Boone's old wrench on the shelf. Maybe someday another man will need to stand here. Maybe he'll wonder if it's worth it. And maybe he'll see that photo and know it is. Because the land doesn't forget who fought for it. And sometimes, its quiet thanks is enough to carry a soul a long, long way. Years passed. The valley deepened. My hair went grayer. The lever rusted. But the water stayed steady. Ridgewater became a myth in some circles, a parable told at barbecues and town halls. They left out the paperwork, the lawyers, the sleepless nights. They remembered the flood that never came. That was fine by me. I never wanted fame. I wanted Ridgewater to be left alone. And it was. Year after year. Kept my post. I made repairs. I planted new trees. I told Boone's stories to anyone who listened. Not as warnings, but as seed. I'll go one day. We all do. But Ridgewater will remain. That's the beauty of land. It doesn't belong to us. We belong to it. I left a key under the flagstone just in case. Left instructions in the journal for whoever comes next. And when I'm gone, I hope someone stands where I stood. Looks out over the valley. Feels the hum beneath their feet. I hope they listen. Because it still speaks. Not in English. Not in legal terms. But in roots. In water. In wind. And if they're quiet long enough, they'll hear Boone. And me. And all the ones who came before. And when they do, when the storms come and someone threatens to take what cannot be taken, I hope they remember. I hope they plant their boots firm in the soil, hands steady on the lever, eyes fixed on the truth. And I hope they smile just like I did. Because the dam won't need to break. The land will speak. And this time, they'll listen.